Good evening. I'm John Batchelor. This is The John Batchelor Show, and I welcome my colleague and friend and co-host, Larry Kudlow, here in 2014. Larry, a very good evening to you. Larry is, of course, the host of CNBC's Kudlow Reports each evening at 7 p.m. East Coast time, as well as Kudlow Radio across the nation on the weekends. Larry, your spirited conversation with several colleagues tonight, Senator Johnson on unemployment and the vote today in the U.S. Senate, and then also Jared Bernstein and Arthur Laffer, two colleagues and economists, over the unemployment politics that we see rolled out now in Washington. Today, the U.S. Senate, with 6 Republican votes, voted to enter into debate. In other words, there will be an amendment process to unemployment benefits being extended. If I understand Senator Johnson tonight, the Republicans are going to insist in the amendments that these unemployment benefits, extending again the unemployment benefits during the Great Recession, be paid for by Harry Reid. What is it that these unemployment benefits represent in Washington now, Larry? The politics of this. How are they playing? Good evening to you.
Good evening, John. Happy New Year to you. Well, it's an interesting story on that. I think probably this is going to wind up being part of Obama's campaign for inequality, or to deal with inequality.
Right.
And it's going to include the minimum wage, and it's going to include big tax increases on upper-end people. They're going to call them tax loopholes, but there's no tax reform. They're not going to lower rates. And the extension of unemployment is going to be part of that. Mind you, we've already had 10 extensions. This would be the 11th. And as I asked Jared Bernstein, after 10 on your 11th, and the thing still hasn't worked, maybe you want to rethink your model. But the answer is no, and they're going to stay with it. Senator Johnson just said, look, the thing's estimated at $6.5 billion, and the Democrats have to come up with pay-fors. Now, a pay-for, I don't know what Johnson was really getting at. I'm not sure where he was going in terms of where the bodies are buried. I mean, there's myriad opportunities to save $6.5 billion. The thing is that Democrats don't need Republicans on this, because it passed the procedure vote today, and it did get 6 Republicans. So they got to 60 votes. But the next vote, John, is only 51. And there's 55 Democrats and 45 Republicans.
Do they have to pay for it, or can they do this? Can they do this without saying where the money comes from?
Well, this is not strictly speaking a budget bill,
right?
And it's not an appropriations bill. That's a good question technically, but so far as I know, it is not being classified as a budget bill, and therefore does not have to be paid for. I mean, it should be paid for, and they could probably find some phony stuff to do that. I mean, it wouldn't be that hard to find some user fees or some kind of penalties for private sector insurance guarantees, let's say for the Federal Deposit Insurance Company. There's all kinds of little gimmicks that they could find. The main point, though, which Johnson made and which my pal Laffer made and which I make, is this stuff doesn't work. It does not work. It creates an incentive, if not an incentive not to work. It lowers the incentive to go back to work. It lowers the incentive to take a job if it doesn't agree with you. And that's the problem. And as I also said, look, the National Bureau of Economic Research, the NBER, in Cambridge, Massachusetts, these are blue-chip, pretty much Ivy League economists and so forth, they just did a study, and they showed that the repeated extensions of unemployment benefits have kept the unemployment rate high. Don't take my word for it. These are like the blue-chip economists, and that's the missing link to reality. People just don't get that it's not going to work again.
Let's go to Lawrence Kotlikoff, because you flagged his op-ed in the New York Times in your colloquy, Larry. This is a professor of economics at Boston University, and he writes that if the president's administration aims to increase employment, to once again drive the American economy on Main Street, it's not continuing to hand out loser fees, which is what the long-term unemployed are. We're paying you even though we don't have a job for you. It's to cut corporate rates and corporate reform, corporate tax reform. The president has teased us about this for 5 years. I see none of that conversation as he comes back to Washington from his vacation.
No, there'll be. He might have one phrase of tax reform, but he doesn't want to do that. Look, Kolikoff's a smart guy. He's kind of a centrist guy. And what he argues is, first of all, get rid of the corporate tax altogether. Just get rid of it. And the reasons for that, in simple terms, is corporations don't pay taxes. People do. Corporations are pass-throughs, John. They collect taxes, okay, and then they turn it over to the IRS, or they might turn some of it back to shareholders and so forth. But what's really going on here is wages would be higher if corporate taxes were non-existent, and consumer prices would be lower if corporate taxes didn't exist. In other words, the companies have to pass it through in the form of lower wages or higher prices. And that's a pretty stupid policy. And what Kolikoff has done the math on, very interesting, he's got a model. The model is at the Brookings Institute, so it's not crazy. It's the Tax Policy Analysis Center. And the model basically shows that kind of action, getting rid of corporate taxes, would benefit labor and wages more than the investors and capital. And that's an interesting finding.
Eliminating the corporate income tax. Again, Larry, big picture here. If I put these two conversations together, the president is gathering forces for a political maneuver with the Republicans in this election year. This is not actually about getting anything done. Handing out more unemployment or teasing and then doing nothing about corporate tax is not about helping Main Street. It's positioning the president and his party to have an offset to what we're going to talk about at length tonight, the catastrophe of the Affordable Care Act. I know it's cynical, but that looks to me to be the construction here.
Well, I think there's a lot to that. I mean, look, if they had their druthers, they would hand out more benefits to the unemployed or the marginally employed if they had their druthers. That's their philosophy. That's their ideology. But politically, I don't know if I assume the votes are there. He only needs 51 votes to get this done, but maybe not. Maybe some of these marginal Democrats from Romney states wouldn't do this because it's not going to be paid for. Perhaps that's the problem. But yeah, we'll hear more in the State of the Union, and this is going to be part of the whole litany. That's so interesting, John. Here we are in New York, and we're looking at Obama in Washington, but actually we got a little Obama here in New York. His name is de Blasio.
Yeah, Red Dawn. Yes,
and you've got a little Obama. You got a female Obama up in Massachusetts. Her name is Elizabeth Warren. And this whole inequality, class warfare mix of politics, and I think these are the lowest politics imaginable, is actually spreading. It actually seems to me that the Democratic Party is about to move left again as they embrace this inequality, tax the rich, provide benefits to the unemployed. And that's surprising after the lessons of Obamacare. I would have thought they'd want to move to the center, and there's half a dozen Democratic senators who are going to lose big time if they don't move to the center. So the whole Democratic Party is being jerked to the left.
In addition, final 15 seconds. Larry, let's tell everybody the economy's getting better. Main Street's going to have a very good year. These panics in Washington are about getting elected for the Democratic Party, not about what's happening in America.
That's correct. And today's trade numbers, I hope we get to them, are very important in that scenario.
Larry Kudlow, Kudlow Report at CNBC and Kudlow Radio on the weekend. My co-host, we're going to Sudeep Reddy of the Wall Street Journal next to discuss the new chairman of the Federal Reserve come February 1st, now confirmed by the United States Senate, Janet Yellen, and the improving economy globally, but especially for the United States. I'm John Batchelor.